Hey guys, what's up? Ben on Bigstuff3 here. How's it going? So on today's video, we're going to be talking about the SR2 ETM section. And what that is in the big stuff world is how we are using traction control to provide the rear wheel speed that we're desiring based on the track conditions that we're seeing. Okay, so obviously everything is going to be much faster if we would not have to ride any type of traction control, but sometimes we don't have a choice. You're going to have to ride something to help you get down, whether you're a small tire radial car or you're a big tire pro mod. It's always definitely nice to have something there to rely on so that if your wheel speed does get out of control, we've got something there to help out. Okay, so located in between the Boost CO2 tab and the ICFS section inside your project is going to be the SR2. Now, if you don't see this listed in your project, that means that the option is not enabled on your ECU, and you're going to have to get that activated for it to be able to be used. So contact us at Bigstuff3 and we'll get y'all set up with that option enabled so that you can actually use it, wire harnesses, get y'all trained up and everything you need to actually get it to work properly. Okay, so if I click in this section right here, we're going to have a bunch of different stuff here to look at. Okay, so the very first thing we want to touch on is the SR2 selection part. In the SR2 selection, you're basically going to be able to choose a bunch of different items. What's most obvious is whether you want this stuff turned off or on. So we're going to leave it enabled to actually run this. If I didn't want to run it, I would just simply select disable. Okay, the next option is going to be ETM select. So I'm going to be able to use the dry shaft RPM or the engine RPM as plots to work from based on however you want to control your engine. Again, dry shaft or engine RPM can be used to build everything off of. Okay, you've got the ability to choose up to 9 different maps and curves to choose from, but the 9 is for the first gear curves only. You've only got 3 SR2 and ETM curves to choose from. So we're going to go over more a little bit of that later on how that works if you choose curve number 6, for example. Okay, the next one is the RPM and TPS settings have to be at a minimum. You typically want to set those actually pretty low. That way for sure the SR2 is always going to activate at the actual RPM and TPS that you actually want it to start working at. Okay, the next option here is roll race mode select. Now, if you have an older firmware in your box, you may not even actually see this here. If you want to get the firmware upgraded, there's no charge for that. We actually just send you an update file and we just take care of everything over the internet now. There is no more sending boxes back to Big Stuff like in the old days to get the firmware updated. All the updates are free. We just pump out firmware updates. You put them into your ECU through the SD card on the GEN4, and that's all that it takes. Okay, so we have an upgrade sheet on the website in the how-to section in the GEN4 section to show you how to do this, or just send us an email at bigstuff3.com or Ben at Bigstuff3EFI.com. We can get y'all set up for getting your ECU updated to the newest software. As of this video, we're at version 17. Okay, so this roll race mode select is actually a separate harness that we would install on your ECU. And what we're doing is we're taking in wheel speed inputs from the front and the rear. Okay, the front will basically be any type of reluctor that you want to have for picking up RPM. And what we do is we can compare it to either the rear wheel 52X standard GM type sensor, or we can look off the dry shaft sensor. The toss RPM in our world is the dry shaft sensor, transmission output speed sensor. Okay, so in the street mode, we're always utilizing this. So if I have street mode selected and I've got the toss RPM selected, I am always looking at my dry shaft sensor RPM in relation to the front wheel speed RPM. And what we do is by you telling us the tire and the gear size, the tire size and the gear ratio, we calculate an actual error based on the front and the rear. Okay, and what there is here is there's a roll race error curve, and in this roll race error curve is where you can actually set up that error based on whatever it is you're targeting. Okay, so in this case, obviously I have 0 RPM wheel spin error, I have 0 spark degree retard. But if I'm out here and I got about 150 wheel spin error, I'm going to be talking about 3.66 degrees of timing out of it. I can go up to 255 RPM error and I've got a 5 degree out of it. Now you could pull up to 20 degrees of timing if you want on this. It's up to you how hard you want it to hit, but in this example, we're just using the 5 degrees. Okay, so if it's always on, if you're in the street or it's always on, you would select street and drive shaft. Okay, if you wanted to use a rear wheel speed sensor as well, you would just simply do street and the rear wheel speed sensor, and that will work too. It's always on. Okay, now if I want to do strip mode, what the strip mode is for is if you have a drag race car that launches and goes wheels up quite a bit, like a lot of race cars do, well, obviously the front wheels are not going to be spinning and the rear wheels are going to be turning. We don't want to pull any timing back because obviously you're going up in the air. You don't want to take any power out of the car. So what we do is we have a delay built in, so you can say, okay, how long am I going to wait to actually turn this on? This application, it's about 1 second. It's typically a good starting point, because also if their wheels are up in the air, this will tug the car back down in similar manners to a wheel speed sensor. If you don't have any actual wheel spin RPM on the front, it will tug you back down. So that's what this delay is for. Okay, if you do want to make changes based on the front wheel speed sensor, you're going to come over here to the front wheel speed ABS and rear wheel speed ABS. These were basically GM analog brake sensors that we're repurposing for use in this application, but you will just simply plug in how many reluctors you have. In this case, 8 for this car that we have working on right now. The stock wheel has 53 pickups on it with a GM sensor. In this case, we're utilizing 8 of the pickups on this vehicle to calculate the gear, the RPM wheel spin error. Okay, so that covers roll rest mode select. You can send the box back to us. We'll get a harness all set up for you there for the front and the rear wheel speed, and then you can go out there and utilize this function. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about here is all of the drive shaft curves and the gear 1 curves and everything here that's grouped together. Okay, so this may look like a lot, but all this simply is all of the same curves, just grouped together differently in different orders. Okay, so this first one, for example, this SR2 gear 1 drive shaft and ETM curve 1. Okay, over here we have SR2 map number 1 chosen in the SR2 selection. All right, so this is number 1. Okay, SR2 gear 1 drive shaft ETM curve 1. So when you choose number 1, this is everything here that is being running. It's going to run this gear curve, and it's going to run this SR2 and ETM curve with this for targeting the drive shaft. All right, now if I was to go over here and choose number 2, okay, now I'm going to be riding this one here. I'm on SR2 gear 1 curve 2 and drive shaft and ETM curve number 2. So if I looked at this guy, for example, and just made it a little bit bigger here, okay, I am now on this gear curve, okay, and then I'm now on this drive shaft and ETM curve. Now, what you want to do here is, if there's any tables here in this section that do not have an engine RPM plot or a drive shaft plot populated based on what you're looking at, here's how to expose that data. Okay, there are 3 little dots here next to this curve up here on the left hand side. Okay, it says click here for options menu. I'm going to left click on it, and what you want to do is you want to show the XY data log plot. Okay, I'm going to select that. Okay, X-axis field, we're going to come over here, we're going to type in S, and we want to get the SR2 timer as our X-axis field. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to pick up SR2 timer. Okay, now I'm going to come over here, I'm going to press R, and I want RPM toss, transmission output speed sensor. Okay, so there you go. So now I have my drive shaft sensor loaded up here. Okay, and that would be the curve that I was using. So obviously my curves are way lower than this drive shaft. We would be absolutely clobbering the traction control based on the drive shaft curve that we're seeing here. Okay, but that's how this stuff works. Okay, so an easy way to edit this table, though, is if I wanted to do something with it here is, let's just say I wanted to redo this table and have it so that now I'm gonna put my timing curve and ETM curve above this. It's extremely simple and it's very fast. So if I come over here and I highlight this add data filter expression, I haven't done anything with it, I haven't clicked on it, I'm just hovering over it. Okay, if I left click on this guy right there, you will now see that the green line has now moved right on top of that drive shaft curve. So the ETM curve is literally hugging that curve beautifully, okay, all the way through. And you can see here, even at the very top, it kind of comes back down to the right and follows it. Okay, so what we've done is we've just programmed that curve based on what's there for the ETM. Now we don't want to have the ETM be our primary curve that we actually work from, okay? We want to have the timing always be the first thing that it's going to hit, all right? So now that we have something to work with, though, it's very simple, very fast, move this around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this ETM curve, okay? I'm going to get it out of the way. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to highlight it, I'm going to hit the plus sign, and I'm going to hit 300 RPM, all right? Actually, maybe I'll go 400 total, so add another 100 RPM to it, okay? All right, so now I have an ETM curve, all right, that is now 400 RPM above where it had put itself, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight that ETM curve again. I'm going to do Control C again. I'm going to do Control C for copy. I'm going to come down here to the SR2 ETM. I'm sorry, the SR2 line, and I'm going to hit Control V. All right. So now I have the same exact thing for both ETM and SR2. I don't want that to be the case. All right. I want to hug the timing a little bit closer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to highlight the SR2 line. I'm going to hit minus, and now I'm going to hit 200. All right. And there you go. So now I have a timing curve, which is 200 RPM over the plot that it had already, that it had sat right over the dry shaft. And now my ETM is 200 RPM over my SR2. So I have now built the curve in about 30 seconds based on the dry shaft sensor that I saw for now configuring the timing and the ETM of this curve, and it's done. And if you wanted to say, you know what, I want to give it plenty of room, right? Now that I've already got these base curves in, let's just say I want to add 300 RPM, 300 RPM to both. Okay, now they're way out of the way. So in case I really want to start pouring the power to it, I've got nothing in the way, and now I can use this curve and start working from it. But that's how you do it. It's very simple. It's very easy. So now that I've created this ETM SR2 curve 2, you will notice that in all the other windows, it is now updated. And here's what I mean by that. That was curve number 2, okay? So if I go to the SR2 dry shaft desired curves, okay, you will see here that my curve number 2 is now updated based on what we did. So in that other window where I made that SR2 curve, it's the same exact thing right here in SR2 desired dry shaft curves. It's all the same thing. If I come over here to where they group together, if I come over here to where they group together all the SR2 Gear 1 dry shaft ETM curve, this is where everything's grouped together, okay? There's my gear curves 1 through 9 at the top, and then on the bottom I've got my gear curves. You'll see here that there is the number 2 that I had joined, that I had changed on that other table. Right here in the middle, it's all been updated and changed. So when you make a change in any window, all the other windows where it shows that same data is updated as well. Okay, so that's how this works. Okay, so the moral of the story basically here is just wherever you are working in, just know that everything is updated per curve everywhere else in your tune-up, okay? So in this window, for example, here in the SR2 dry shaft desired curves, I do not have anything listed here, okay? But remember, we can get this shown. We just simply have to bring in the dry shaft data as shown before, okay? So all you simply do, there's 3 dots in the upper left-hand corner of this window, okay? I'm gonna left click it up here for the options menu. I'm gonna show the XY data log plot. Come over here on my SR2 timer. In this case, it had already actually chosen RPM engine. I want RPM toss for the dry shaft, and then there you go. Okay, that's how you load it in any curve that you want to load into these plots. Okay, now one thing to remember is you have to have a log open in the graphing and logging section, and obviously you have to have a dry shaft sensor that you are reading from. If there's no dry shaft sensor or there's no log, if I try to do that show XY data log plot, okay, I'm not going to have anything to choose from here because I don't have a data log open to compare it to, okay? So another example, here's my ETM dry shaft RPM curve window. I don't have a dry shaft plot in here. I'm going to go show XY data log plot, boom. SR2 timer is my x-axis, RPM toss is there, okay? So that's how you configure all these tables. They're all the same. the biggest thing that you want to remember is to use that little purple icon in the left hand corner. If you want to start over with a tune-up and it makes it really fast to breeze around and do that work. And you always want to have the drive shaft SR2 over the ETM. The ETM is your ignition cut, okay? We always want to have our drive shaft over our ignition, all right? So what I want to do one more time is to show you a brief example here again. On curve number 3, I have everything set for 10,000 RPM, okay? So I have nothing in curve number 3. And here's how fast we can make a plot for this, okay? So if I come over here and I'm going to go show XY data log plot, okay, I'm going to come over here to SR2 timer. I'm going to grab the SR2 timer on the X field, RPM of the toss. Okay, there you go. So there's my drive shaft there right now, okay? So we come over here to the purple icon, right? Left click on that. Boom. My ETM has now made a curve on it. All right. So now what I can do is I can take this curve and I can utilize this guy to actually work with in order to create and to build a curve, okay? If I highlight each one of these dots, I'm now actually, it'll show you the dot below that it's actually working with. If you actually notice in this plot, this is a good example, we're only going out 6 seconds on this table, but I'm actually going about 7 seconds out on this actual curve. So if I come over here and I do an auto scale of the XY axes, okay, now it'll actually source it back in. It made my last one 8 seconds, and there's my drive shaft data going all the way out, okay? And it shows that these curves are basically just hugging here, okay? Come over here, then it shows that they went back up to 10,000 where that curve had fallen off the map before. But again, what I can do now is I can take this curve data, because this is ETM, I don't want that to be the primary, increase that by, let's say, 300. Actually, we'll give it a little bit more room. We'll make it 400 total. Then what I can do is I can highlight the same row, do Control C on the ETM. Come over here to Control V. All right, so now what I've done is I have created the ETM in green, okay, and my SR2 timing is in red. Okay, I'm going to subtract 200 out of it because they're both the same thing. And then there you go. And now again, if I want to give it some extra room, I could hit another 300 on there, and now I've got room on my curve. Okay, so that's it. I've now built a curve to cover it. It's done. It's that easy. If you actually wanted to compare everything, again, that's what this section is for right here, where you actually have everything grouped together, okay? So in here, they would actually show you all those different curves together. So you can see here, basically, I made, the first one we did was this one right here, and it's actually the same exact thing as number 3, which is great. This can show you this because they're all grouped together. So you know what? I want to give even more room to number 3. So I could highlight that, 300 more, okay? So now I've got number 1 basically is my hottest tune-up with the most room. Number 2 is my most medium tune-up, if you would. I'm sorry, 2 would be my lowest tune-up because I'm hugging the curve really tight. And then the SR2 and ETM number 3 would be somewhere in the middle, okay? And again, this does not have the drive shaft. How would we do that? 3 dots upper left-hand corner, show XY data log plot, SR2 timer would be here, and then RPM toss. Right there, RPM toss, and there's my drive shaft. So you can see that nothing is sitting right on top of it. You got plenty of room, okay? So that's how you move all that stuff around. Now, if we wanted to get into the, we wanted to do an engine curve instead of a drive shaft curve, here is how we do that, okay? So let's just say I want to start working with engine RPM. I'm not doing drive shaft anymore. I want to do an engine RPM curve, okay? So first thing I would do is I would come over here and I would start with my SR2 desired dry shaft curve, because right now we're still looking at RPM toss. Okay, we want to come over here, we want to look at RPM engine. So you can see here the RPM of the engine is way different from the dry shaft for obvious reasons, right? So if I just highlight this very first dry shaft curve line and I press the purple icon, the add edit data filter expression, okay, I have now sat directly on my engine RPM curve line. All right, and what this is doing now, this is sitting right on top of it. I don't want to sit right on top of it. I want to give it some room, so I'm going to put 300 on this. And now I'm actually resting above that line on top of it, okay? So now what I can do is I'm going to highlight number 1. I'm going to go Control C. I'm going to go to the middle curve, number 2. I'm going to do Control V. Then I'm going to add 300 to that curve. I'm going to paste the same exact curve, Control V into number 3. Then I'm going to hit that one with 500. Okay, so now you can see, or actually I'll give it another 100 RPM. Okay, so there you go. So now you can see I've just built 3 engine RPM curves, okay, to cover the engine RPM. I'm sorry, I just built 3 timing-based curves to cover the engine RPM. And you can have it sit right on top of it. This will work either way, and I'll show you how. So if I wanted to now create an ETM curve to sit on top of this, because remember, timing is SR2, ETM is ignition, right? I'm going to highlight all 3 rows. I'm going to go Control C. I just copied all 3 of those rows. And now I'm going to come over here to the ETM. I'm going to highlight all 3 of those rows. I'm going to hit Control V. Okay, I now have the exact same lines that I do on the other tune-up inside here. Okay, so what I want to do is I screwed up. I must have not gone the 3rd curve correctly here. So let me grab this line again here. Control C for the dry shaft line. Then I'm going to do Control V to paste that. There you go. All right. And then I'm going to change the Y field to be RPM engine. Okay, there we go. So now I have the same exact thing for SR2 and ETM. I don't want that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all 3 of these rows. I'm going to give it 300 RPM. And now you'll see that for my SR2 ETM engine 1 and 2, I'm going to have distance between each row. So let's go look at that. So if I come over here to SR2, gear 1 and dry shaft ETM curve 1, okay, you're going to see here now that my curve looks nothing like it did before. I don't want to look at the dry shaft anymore. I want to look at RPM engine, and there you go. And you can see here in the red, the dots are highlighting right there. That is my timing curve. So right there in red is my timing curve. They're all highlighted. Then in the green is my ETM, because my ETM is always sitting on top. But now you've got a curve, it's built, it's done. Obviously, you'd want to move some of these dots around to not, be in this exact same configuration as what this is here, because, everything could be just moved around on the actual graph itself, or you can do it down here in the lines. Either way, it's totally up to you, but that's it. You've now adjusted everything to work off of the engine RPM very simply, and you can do either one at this point, okay? So now that we're done with that, what we want to get into is go down here to these tables. Now these tables are very important because this is going to depend. This is going to tell the EC what to do as far as when we actually start hitting those lines with RPM, engine RPM, or dry shaft RPM. Okay. So the first thing here is the SR2 dry shaft error table. Okay, and what this means is I can either poke timing in or I can take timing out. Okay, so what happens here is in our world, if it's a negative number, okay, that means we're actually going over our curve. So if I start to go 35 RPM over in this example, I'm going to be tugging out 7 degrees. If I'm tugging out, if the error is 70 RPM over my curve, I'm going to start pulling out 8. If I'm all the way 250 RPM over, I'm tugging out 15 degrees of timing in this motor, okay? Now, it's vice versa. We can also go the other way, okay? So let's just say if at any point in this map up to about 2 seconds or so, If I'm actually below it, I want to add in 3. So right here, if I'm 50 RPM below, I'm going to add in 3 degrees of timing up to around 2 seconds. Totally up to you. If that's how you want to deal, you can leave this all zeroed out. So it's only going to be removing timing, but you can create a plot to add in timing as well for the SR2. Okay. And don't forget to configure this table, because you can adjust the RPM on this side as far as the error. You can also adjust the time. Okay. You can totally configure the axes to work however you want them to work for your application. Okay. So I'm going to close that out. The next one down is going to be the ETM SR2 desired dry shaft curve. So what this is, they just simply group everything together to show you how everything is working together. Remember, this is SR2 and ETM, right? So in this table, I was still looking at the dry shaft. So if I come back over here and choose RPM engine and then the Y-axis field, boom, I can now see all my curves right there and how they're all working together. Okay. And again, we basically always want to have the ETM. The ETM, we always want to be higher than the SR2. SR2 timing has to always work first, and then the ETM comes into play. Okay. The next one down here is the ETM dry shaft error table. Now, what this is here is if in case you do start going into the ETM curve itself, we actually want to start taking out some spark to make sure that the engine's going to actually come down, because when you start pulling torque because you're actually killing the spark, the engine will definitely slow down. So you don't want to go below a 20 or so here. Okay, 20 is enough to bring the engine back down. You could even go down to a 0 ETM, but that literally means no ignition's firing, and that's not a good thing if an engine comes back to life if you got loaded up with fuel and a bunch of stuff. So you want to make the lowest number possible, about 20. Okay, so what this means here is if I'm 300 RPM over my ETM curve, it's going to apply a 20 number of ETM. 32 is full power, 0 is no power. Okay, so we're basically going to be pulling about a third of the power out of the engine, and that should be plenty enough to kill the engine to bring it back down to where you can get back down below your curve. Okay, and again, these curves are fully configurable. You can make them based off of any time, any error that you want to configure your application. Just make sure to not go below 20 here on the ETM for your spark cut. Okay. The last thing that we want to talk about here is the rev limit error table. This is a table that we use to adjust how hard the rev limiter hits on your engine combination. All this table does is look at the engine acceleration versus the error RPM of the set point that you're working with. And this is all ETM numbers, okay? So depending on your engine, we may actually have some pretty aggressive numbers, some low numbers in here. We may have some relatively high numbers in here, but this motor combination works fine with these in here. It has plenty of engine RPM limiting capability. It works fine. This is basically an infinitely adjustable hard cut or soft cut as far as spark goes. Okay. If you have any questions, you can send us an email or give us a shout on this table. But for most applications, this shouldn't need to be touched here. This is only based on rev limiting. That's it. This is rev limiting for 2-step, 3-step, and the max engine RPM. That is it for this table here. Okay. Okay, guys. So now what we're going to get into is the actual data log, and actually how to look at your log to see what you're actually doing is the right thing as far as making the changes necessary to make the adjustments to run the traction control properly. Okay. So what we've got over here is I'm in the data logger right now, and I've got a run. And basically what I want to do is I want to see how well this is working for my tune-up. Okay. So what we have is a bunch of pre-built tabs that come with the software, and what you're going to want to do is run over to the SR2 section. I got this SR2 tab up, and down here below, if there's any other tabs you want to populate as far as data goes, okay, you can bring those in. But inside this SR2 tab, we've got the most basic ones that we want. We've got dry shaft in there. We got the ETM torque stages. We've got the gear one that we're leaving on. But the first thing that we're going to want to do here is just move this around, and we gotta zero out this point. Okay, we gotta zero out the SR2 timer. So up here where I have all my data listed. Okay, you want to find your SR2 timer. We want to go back to where it shows 0. Okay, right there. Okay, and as soon as it goes to 0, you're gonna hit Control 0, or you're gonna right click it. All right, and you're gonna do set current time to 0. And what that does is we've now zeroed out our run. So now we know where 6/10 is, 7/10 is, etc., all the way out through all of our runs. Okay. So now what we can do is we can bring this back and bring my cursor over there, and I can zoom in by pressing the up arrow. So what you'll see here is at about 3/10, 4/10 of a second. Okay, I'm already pulling 11 degrees. This green line here that took off, okay, is my timing ramping out of my gear 1 spark curve. So that's just timing that we're pulling out automatically based on our gear 1 curve. Okay, so that's what that is. All right, this green line right here. Okay, and then you're gonna see this red dip that we're gonna walk into right there, and then boom. Okay, right there we're whacking out 10 degrees, and the reason being is because we've got this big dry shaft spike here. So the purple down here, okay, this purple is the actual dry shaft. So you can see here that the dry shaft took a big freaking spike and it said, whoa, and based on our table, we actually pulled 10 more degrees out. Now, in the white here, you can see that that's engine RPM. So we whacked it, engine RPM came back down, the dry shaft came back down, and we then took off again, okay? So that's a great example of what actually happens to the overall timing in the motor. Now, what's interesting here is this blue line right here is timing. You can see here that right there, I've actually got about a -1/10 of a degree of timing in the engine. I mean, we basically stalled the motor out, no issues. We just simply hit some very low timing and ramped it right back in immediately. Once we were in the clear, and we're back to around 15 degrees timing or so because we're still on that timing retard. But it was a quick little blitz. It got through it, it powered through it, and we were out. We were on our way. Now, what we can do here is you can look at this in a couple different ways. Okay, so if I zoom out, okay, and now I've got this window here to the right showing exactly where I'm at of time. I can now see exactly where that dip is right there. Okay, so I'm right about there is that dip, and you can see that we've got the traction control coming down there pretty hard in this SR2 desired dry shaft curve 1. And you can see here, I've got it chosen. Okay, and that's what this is right here in my logger. Now, I can look at this better, easier if I come up here to the actual SR2 section and I look at it in this way. So now I can see it easier. Okay, and the data logger combines everything into a single pane, but if I look at it this way, I can now see where the dry shaft actually took off and went, and it's right about here. Okay, and it's about 3/10 of a second. It actually started showing some movement there, and it started taking off there pretty good. All right, so this is what you can use to fine tune it. Now, obviously, you can see here we had plenty of room away from the actual dry shaft and the SR2 and ETM curve. We gave it plenty of room out there. We got somewhat close to the very top here. We kind of were walking into it out there, but for the most part, we didn't touch it at all. And you can tell that we didn't touch it because this SR2, zoom out here with the down arrow, okay. This SR2 dry shaft spike offset, see this one that was in red that took this dip right here? This is the SR2 dry shaft spark offset right there, boom. 10 3/4, and then it never turned on again throughout the home run. I'm just hitting the down arrow just to zoom out, but it never hit anywhere else. So you can tell that we never actually turned on anywhere else, okay? What's nice to know is how hard you actually hit it based on the table we created. So if I come down here to SR2 and I come over here to the SR2 dry shaft error table, okay, if I go back to that point where I was at, right here, coming up where it took that nosedive, if I'm coming over, right there, that's where we spun. Okay, and we had the error that came in and it took out that 10-11 degrees exactly like it was supposed to. Okay, we came back down below our curve and it ramped right back in. So again, it's very handy, it's very nice to be able to look at your logs and to actually see what you were doing throughout that log. It's the same thing with the ETM. Okay, if I come over here to my ETM dry shaft error table, okay, you'll see here it's only up there at the very top row moving around because I never actually hit anything. But if you did hit it, it would come down and it would show you which ETM value it did touch. All right, so you can just simply see that we never touched anywhere, so no ETM was ever lowered. Okay, it'll also say it right here in this ETM torque stage number 31 as well. So that's how you go through your logger, just to look at everything. But again, the SR2 gear curve 1, it's all there. We were on gear curve 1 right there. The ellipse is showing you where we're at in relation to the curve. But once you start looking at that data, it definitely gives you a much better heads up on what's going on. Now, this vehicle, we do have the race control also enabled as well too. So let's look at that, the roll race here. I've actually created another tab for that. So let's go over here to first gear roll race. Okay. So let me turn some of this stuff off here. I'm going to just come down and turn some of this stuff off to make it easier to see here. Okay. Spark advance. I want my wheel spin. Okay, I'm going to make this as easy as possible to check out here. Okay. So turn all this stuff off. Okay, so what this is right here, this is the Spark Advanced BCP. I'm actually going to turn that off right now too. Turn off Spark Advanced BCP. Okay. So wheel spin, I want on. All right. So now, okay, you'll see here that the SR2 timer is still running about a second out. When we enabled it, it was based on the 1 second, okay? It was allowed to start working. And we definitely had some wheel spin error happening, okay? So again, based off of the 150 RPM or so, we definitely were pulling some timing. So if I come over to SR2, not that, SR2 roll race error curve, okay? If I'm about 150 RPM, a little bit easier to actually see it here. Okay, I'm about 150 RPM. I'm going to be tugging out about 3.8 degrees of timing, okay? So this curve right here is my wheel spin. As you can see, it's going down as I'm going down track. And I had a couple quick little blitzes right there, okay, of little spikes, which means it pulled the timing. But once I was about 2.5 seconds out, my error was gone and she was cruising on down Broadway without any wheel spin at all, okay? Now, the Spark will just be, the Spark Advance will just be pulled off of the Spark Advance itself. So you'll see right here in green is the actual Spark Advance. And then right there where the actual wheel spin is detected and we let it come on at 1 second, boom, the green line goes down and out comes my timing, okay? So again, you'll see every time I got a little spike right there in the red, okay, the timing is out. I go down, I come back up. So that's the roll race in action doing exactly what it's supposed to do, all right? One other thing to remember here is if you're looking at your logger and if these lines are jammed up and they don't look good inside the logger, what you want to do is go in here to the field limits editor. So that point is called RPM wheel spin. And if I come up here to the RPM wheel spin point, you can edit it, okay? So in this case, I have it set for -100 and 300. If I made it 500, this is how I get it to move it around. So watch that red line. Okay, and now I just made it a little bit smaller, okay? So if I want to make it a little bit bigger, I can make it 200. Okay, now it's a real big number there. So it's basically increasing the resolution if you would. Okay, so now there's the RPM error of the wheel spin right there shown very big, okay? So that's how you adjust that to make more sense. But traction control is definitely part of every track cars or street cars tune-up. If you're trying to get down a road, all these tables here are there for your adjustment to get down. So if you have any questions, please give us a shout. Bigstuff3EFI.com, Bigstuff3.com, or Ben@Bigstuff3EFI.com, and we look forward to hearing from you and get you all straightened out the traction control setup. Hope you have a good one. Take care. Thanks.